When chaos hits, our first instinct isn't to think clearly, it's to react. The human brain is wired for survival, and in times of uncertainty, it defaults to fight, flight, or freeze. That instinct served us well thousands of years ago when the danger was a predator in the wild. But in modern times, the predator often looks like a collapsing market, a broken relationship, or a global crisis. And in these situations, instinctive panic clouds the very judgment we need most. Think about the last time you faced sudden uncertainty. Maybe it was a medical scare, a job loss, or a piece of news that shook your world. Did your mind immediately go to the worst-case scenario? That's fear doing its job, preparing you to defend yourself. But fear doesn't distinguish between a lion chasing you and an email that says, "We need to talk." In both cases, your heart races, your focus narrows, and your ability to see the bigger picture shrinks. Clarity, on the other hand, is the antidote to panic. It's not about pretending everything is fine, nor is it about ignoring the problem. Clarity is about seeing the situation as it truly is, no more, no less. When we strip away exaggeration and catastrophic thinking, we start to notice options we didn't see before. We see opportunities for choice, for strategy, for resilience. In chaos, the loudest voice in the room is usually fear, and fear screams. It tells us to act fast, to decide now, to run before we even know where we're running. But clarity whispers. It asks us to pause, to breathe, to assess. It doesn't silence fear completely, but it makes fear a counselor rather than a dictator. Leaders, parents, friends, we've all been in positions where others look to us during uncertainty. And in those moments, what people need most is not someone who knows all the answers, but someone who can think clearly enough to hold the room steady. Clarity is contagious. When one person sees calmly, others borrow their lens. The truth is, clarity doesn't remove difficulty, it transforms it. The storm still rages, but with clear thinking, the storm doesn't own us. We stop reacting blindly and start responding intentionally. And in that shift, possibilities emerge that chaos alone would have hidden from view. What's remarkable is that clarity doesn't require genius. It requires discipline. The discipline to pause before speaking. The discipline to verify before believing. The discipline to ask, what's really happening here? Instead of, what's the worst that could happen? That discipline turns chaos from a fog into a landscape we can navigate. When clarity enters chaos, it doesn't eliminate uncertainty, but it gives us direction inside it. It doesn't provide guarantees, but it equips us with perspective. And more than anything, it reminds us that while we cannot control the storm, we can control the way we steer through it. Fear is powerful because it distorts perception. It magnifies shadows into monsters and turns uncertainty into inevitability. When fear takes the wheel, the future doesn't just look uncertain, it looks doomed. And the irony is that the more afraid we feel, the more convinced we become that what we imagine must be true. Consider how easily fear escalates. A missed call from the doctor becomes a terminal diagnosis in our minds before we even hear the voicemail. A dip in sales becomes the end of the business before the quarter is even over. Fear fills the gaps between facts with stories, and those stories rarely end well. The brain prefers a scary story over no story at all. Facts, on the other hand, are grounding. They don't care about our emotions, they simply are. The doctor hasn't called back yet. Sales dipped this month, but the year isn't finished. The truth may still be difficult, but facts give us a stable surface to stand on. Fear may paint the room as dark and endless, but facts are like a light switch. They reveal the actual size of the space. The challenge that fear feels real in the body. It raises heart rates, shortens breath, and creates physical evidence that something is wrong. So we often mistake the feeling of danger for the presence of danger. The body reacts to imagined threat almost the same way it reacts to a real one. That's why separating fear from fact takes conscious effort. It's not natural, it's intentional. One of the most useful questions in these moments is simple. What do I know to be true right now? Not what I fear, not what I assume, not what I heard secondhand, what I actually know. This question cuts through the fog. It doesn't remove fear, but it puts fear in its rightful place as an emotion to acknowledge, not a prophecy to obey. When leaders or communities get swept away by fear, decisions become reactive, impulsive, and often destructive. But when facts lead, and fear is acknowledged without being obeyed, decisions shift from emotional reactions to thoughtful responses. The difference can determine whether a crisis escalates or stabilizes. This doesn't mean facts always bring comfort. Sometimes the facts are hard, sometimes the reality is painful. But clarity built on facts, no matter how harsh, is always better than confusion built on fear. Because when we deal with reality as it is, we can plan, prepare, and act. When we deal with fear alone, we're only fighting shadows. Fear makes the world look bigger and scarier than it is. Facts shrink it back down to its actual size. And once we see the difference, the space between feeling and reality becomes the space where clear thinking lives. In stressful moments, the instinct to act is overwhelming. We feel pressure to respond, to move, to do something, anything that gives us a sense of control. But often that rush to act is what traps us in mistakes. The most powerful tool we have in those moments isn't action at all, it's pause. The pause doesn't mean inaction, it means giving ourselves space to see clearly before we move. Think of an athlete before a crucial play. The crowd is loud, the stakes are high, and yet the best performers slow themselves down. They take a breath, center their focus, and only then step forward. That pause isn't wasted time, it's preparation. Without it, their movements would be rushed and sloppy. With it, their movements become deliberate and precise. In everyday life, we rarely give ourselves that same permission. An urgent email arrives and we respond instantly. A problem appears and we react without thinking. The pause feels unnatural because our culture glorifies speed. But speed without clarity often just means moving quickly in the wrong direction. Neurologically, the pause matters. Stress floods the brain with chemicals that narrow perspective and trigger reflexes. By pausing, even for a few breaths, we give the brain a chance to reset, to shift from reactivity to reasoning. What looks like hesitation on the outside is, in reality, the brain regaining access to its best tools: judgment, perspective, and creativity. The pause also creates emotional distance. When anger, fear, or anxiety surge, a pause puts a buffer between feeling and action. It allows us to notice the emotion without being consumed by it. That distance doesn't erase the feeling, but it stops the feeling from becoming the decision maker. Great leaders know the value of silence in a room. A pause after a tough question, a pause before delivering news, a pause in the middle of conflict. Each moment of stillness communicates control, thoughtfulness, and presence. It shows that clarity is more important than speed. It shows that decisions are being made, not reactions. The pause is not weakness, it is discipline. It takes far more strength to hold still intention than to rush forward blindly. And in that stillness, new options often reveal themselves. A problem that seemed to demand urgency may, in fact, offer multiple solutions if we simply allow space to see them. Pausing doesn't solve the storm outside, but it reshapes the storm inside. And when the storm inside settles, the choices we make on the outside become wiser, steadier, and truer to the outcome we actually want. When life becomes difficult, our natural tendency is to label it as the end. The end of stability, the end of opportunity, the end of what we thought life should look like. But endings are rarely as absolute as they seem. More often, they are transitions, bridges from one chapter to the next. The way we frame the story determines whether we see only collapse or the possibility of renewal. Every human being tells themselves stories about what is happening. We don't just experience events, we interpret them. We say, this is failure, or this is unfair, or this is impossible. But the same event can carry a very different meaning depending on the story we attach to it. Losing a job can be proof that I wasn't good enough, or the moment I was pushed towards something better. The facts stay the same, but the framing changes everything. In difficult times, reframing the narrative doesn't deny hardship, it redefines its role. Hardship becomes not the villain that destroyed us, but the teacher that shaped us. It becomes part of the story of resilience, not the end of it. History is full of individuals and communities who endured unimaginable struggles and later spoke of those times as the crucible that forged strength they didn't know they had. Our brains are wired to seek patterns and meaning, and when the pattern looks broken, despair creeps in. Reframing gives the mind a new pattern to follow. Instead of chaos without purpose, we find continuity a setback that leads to growth, a loss that clears space for gain, a challenge that demands creativity. This doesn't make the pain disappear, but it gives the pain a place within the larger story. Think about how leaders inspire in crisis. They don't pretend the situation isn't serious. They acknowledge the difficulty, but then they tell a story of what it can mean. This is the moment we will look back on as the turning point. This is where we learned what we were truly capable of. People don't just follow leaders because of strategy. They follow because of the story those leaders helped them believe about themselves. On a personal level, reframing the narrative is an act of ownership. It says, I don't control everything that happens to me, but I do control the meaning I assign to it. That meaning becomes the lens through which we see possibilities or limitations. And the more we practice reframing, the more naturally we begin to see opportunity where once we only saw endings. This practice doesn't ignore reality. If a business closes, it closes. If a loved one is lost, they are gone. Reframing doesn't rewrite the facts, it rewrites our relationship to the facts. It asks, what does this mean for me now? What does this allow that was not possible before? Those questions don't erase grief or difficulty, but they open the door to a future not defined solely by loss. The story we tell ourselves in difficult times is the foundation of how we act. If the story is, this is the end, we give up. If the story is, this is the beginning of something else, we search for what that something else can be. And in that search, we uncover strength, creativity, and courage that the old story would have hidden from us. Clear thinking does not happen in a vacuum. When the world feels unstable, the mind naturally seeks safety, and without it, clarity is nearly impossible. That safety comes not only from within, but also from the relationships and environments we build. Trust becomes the anchor that steadies us in uncertainty, allowing the mind to process without being hijacked by fear or suspicion. When trust is present, communication becomes honest and direct. We don't waste energy second-guessing motives, questioning loyalty, or interpreting hidden meanings. The absence of trust turns every word into noise and every action into doubt. But when trust exists, information flows freely, and with it, clarity emerges. We think better when we know the ground beneath us won't collapse. Honesty is the twin of trust. Difficult times often tempt people to withhold truth in the hope of protecting others or preserving control. Yet dishonesty, even if well-intentioned, breeds confusion. When people sense they're not being told the full story, their minds fill the gaps with fear and suspicion. In contrast, truth, even when painful, creates clarity. It gives people a stable reality to work from instead of a fog of uncertainty. In families, organizations, and communities, trust functions like oxygen. You don't notice it when it's present, but when it's absent, everything begins to suffocate. Without trust, people hesitate, hold back, and make decisions in isolation. With trust, people share openly, act collaboratively, and align around a common understanding. The difference isn't just emotional, it directly shapes the quality of decisions. Leaders often underestimate how much trust impacts clarity. In times of crisis, people don't need perfect answers, they need honest ones. They don't need guarantees of certainty, they need evidence of integrity. When leaders speak with transparency, even about unknowns, they anchor people's thinking in reality rather than rumor. That anchoring is what allows collective clarity to grow. On a personal level, trust allows vulnerability. It gives us the freedom to admit, I don't know, or I need help, without fear of being exploited or dismissed. That vulnerability is not weakness, it's the birthplace of clearer thinking. When we no longer waste energy protecting ourselves from judgment, we have more energy to face the actual problem. Trust also accelerates decision-making. In environments where people trust one another, decisions are made faster because motives are not questioned and facts are not hidden. In environments without trust, every step forward is slowed by suspicion. Clarity thrives when trust removes the friction of doubt. At its core, trust transforms difficult times from isolated struggles into shared journeys. It anchors not only our relationships, but also our reasoning. With trust, the mind is free to focus on solutions instead of defenses, on understanding instead of suspicion, on clarity instead of confusion. One of the greatest obstacles to clear thinking in difficult times is the tendency to fixate on what lies beyond our control. The mind obsesses over headlines, decisions made in distant rooms, or outcomes we cannot change. This fixation drains energy, heightens stress, and leaves us paralyzed. Clarity begins with a simple but powerful distinction: what can I influence and what can I not? When we focus on what we cannot control, we feed frustration and helplessness. It is like rowing against a storm, exhausting effort with no movement forward. But when we turn attention to what we can influence, the storm doesn't feel smaller, but our capacity to navigate it grows. The act of shifting focus itself restores a sense of agency. Think about times of personal crisis. We cannot control how others react, but we can control how we respond. We cannot control the timing of external events, but we can control the preparation we bring to them. That shift in perspective doesn't remove difficulty, but it transforms despair into direction. Suddenly, there is something meaningful to do, even in the midst of chaos. History shows that resilient individuals and communities share this trait. They don't waste time wishing circumstances were different. They pour energy into what can still be shaped. A family facing loss focuses on supporting one another. A business facing downturn focuses on innovation within its reach. The environment may remain uncertain, but clarity grows because their attention is tethered to the possible rather than the impossible. The mind is easily seduced by the uncontrollable because it demands nothing of us except worry. Worry feels active, but it produces nothing. Influence, on the other hand, demands effort. It requires discipline to ask, what action is within my reach today? That discipline shifts energy from rumination to resolution, from spinning to steady movement. This principle applies in leadership as well. A leader who fixates on uncontrollable forces spreads anxiety to those they lead. But a leader who consistently identifies and emphasizes the controllables gives people direction. They show that even in turbulence, there are levers we can pull and steps we can take. That clarity calms fear and inspires action. The distinction also protects mental health. Many people collapse under pressure not because of the weight of reality, but because of the weight of imagined responsibility for things they cannot change. By consciously releasing what is outside our control, we preserve energy for what is within it. That choice keeps us grounded and balanced in times when balance feels impossible. Clarity, then, is not about having control over everything. It is about being precise in where we place our effort. By focusing on the control, we choose to invest in progress rather than paralysis, in influence rather than illusion, in movement rather than despair. Hope is often misunderstood as wishful thinking, as if it means closing our eyes to reality and imagining a world that doesn't exist. But real hope is not about denial, it is about direction. It looks at the same facts everyone else sees, but chooses to interpret them through the lens of possibility rather than inevitability. That shift doesn't erase hardship, but it transforms how we endure it. In difficult times, hopelessness is seductive. It feels honest, even responsible, to expect the worst. But hopelessness drains energy before the work even begins. Hope, by contrast, fuels resilience. It does not guarantee success, but it makes the pursuit of success possible. Without it, effort collapses under the weight of despair. With it, effort persists long after the body and mind want to quit. Think about explorers, innovators, and leaders who faced conditions that seemed impossible. They were not blind to the dangers or difficulties ahead. They were painfully aware of them. But what kept them moving was hope, the conviction that there was something on the other side worth enduring for. Hope was not a distraction from reality, it was the compass that helped them navigate it. In personal crisis, hope serves the same role. When a diagnosis comes, when a relationship breaks, when a future dissolves, hope keeps people from surrendering to the narrative that this is all there is. It whispers that meaning can still be found, that growth is still possible, that tomorrow may hold something the present cannot yet reveal. That whisper can be the difference between survival and collapse. Hope as strategy also requires clarity. It does not simply say, things will get better. It asks, what small steps can I take toward better? It translates belief into action. Without that translation, hope becomes fantasy. But when hope directs effort, it becomes the fuel of resilience and the seed of innovation. For leaders, hope is one of the most powerful strategies in their toolkit. In crisis, people look for evidence that their sacrifices are not in vain. Leaders who articulate a vision of hope, not blind optimism, but grounded possibility, ignite perseverance in others. They provide the emotional energy that strategy and planning alone cannot create. The danger is when hope is mistaken for certainty. Hope does not promise that outcomes will unfold exactly as we wish. It does not eliminate setbacks, but it gives us the resilience to move through those setbacks with our sense of direction intact. Without that resilience, even the best plans crumble under pressure. Hope is not the denial of reality. It is the determination to move through reality with belief in what could still be possible. It takes the same difficult circumstances and offers a new way of engaging with them, one that sustains effort and courage when fear or despair would otherwise take over. Courage is often imagined as the absence of fear, but fear never truly disappears. Courage is the decision to move forward despite it. And that decision becomes far more possible when thinking is clear. When our minds are clouded by confusion or panic, fear feels overwhelming. But when clarity cuts through the fog, the path forward becomes visible, and courage follows naturally. Unclear thinking breeds hesitation. We second guess, we replay scenarios, and we imagine endless worst-case outcomes. The lack of clarity makes even small risks feel enormous. But when the facts are sorted, the options weighed, and the decision framed clearly, the fear does not vanish, it simply becomes manageable. Courage thrives not in the absence of fear, but in the presence of clarity. Think about a firefighter entering a burning building. The danger is obvious, the fear is real, but their training gives them clarity on the layout, on the risks, on the steps they must take. That clarity organizes their fear and channels it into action. Without it, the fear would paralyze. With it, they can move. The same principle applies in every sphere of life, from business decisions to personal challenges. Clarity also strips away unnecessary weight. Much of what keeps us from acting is not the challenge itself, but the noise around it, the opinions of others, the imagined judgments, the exaggerated consequences. Clear thinking filters out that noise and reduces the problem to its essentials. When the decision is cleaner, the step forward feels lighter and courage becomes more accessible. Leaders who think clearly give others courage too. In uncertain times, people borrow courage from those who articulate reality in a way that feels steady and truthful. When a leader says, here is what we know, here is what we don't, and here is what we will do next, clarity spreads. And with it, fear is contained, and courage becomes possible at a collective level. Courage without clarity often turns reckless. It leaps without understanding, driven more by impulse than by wisdom. But courage with clarity is different. It is deliberate, intentional, and sustainable. It balances risk with reason, fear with fact, urgency with patience. This kind of courage is not about bravado, it is about endurance. On a personal level, many of the moments we remember as courageous in our lives were made possible by clarity. The decision to leave a toxic situation, to speak a difficult truth, to take a leap into the unknown, all of these began with seeing the situation clearly enough to know that inaction carried a greater cost than action. Clarity reframes risk in a way that courage can grasp. When thinking is clear, decisions are cleaner. And when decisions are cleaner, courage becomes not an extraordinary act, but a natural response. It becomes the step that follows clarity, the movement that arises when fear is acknowledged but no longer allowed to lead.